Section 3.4 is all about slope, and this should be another section that is just a review over things that you've learned in the past. Let's start this section with the most basic definition of what slope is. Slope is rise over run. Typically, you represent slope with a lowercase m. And now let's look at a more intricate definition of what slope is, or how slope can be found. So just looking at this diagram, you can see the rise is in the red and the run is in the blue. You can find the rise by taking the y coordinates of the points and subtracting them, and then you would find the run by taking the x coordinates of the 2 points and subtracting those. So again, a more intricate definition of what slope is would be by taking the difference of the y's over the difference of the x's. So again, difference means to subtract. So I'm going to subtract the y values and I'm going to subtract the x values. So it would look like this. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now these subscripts again don't hold any kind of numerical value. They're just names of the points. So really the purpose of these is, if you start with the y value of the second coordinate, you need to start with the x value of the second coordinate as well. So whatever y you start with on top, you need to take that corresponding x value and start that at the bottom. Otherwise, it doesn't matter which x or y value you start with. As long as whatever y you start with the corresponding x value on the bottom as you are finding slope. Next, we have positive versus negative slopes. So you should be able to look at a graph and tell whether it has a positive slope or a negative slope, again, just by looking at the graph. And this can be determined by going uphill or downhill. So looking at this first graph, the graph is going uphill from left to right. So therefore, this would be a positive slope. So again, if you move from left to right and your graph goes uphill, it is a positive slope. Looking at the second graph, as I move from left to right, this graph is going downhill. So therefore, this is a negative slope. Here again, if you go from left to right and your graph goes downhill, that is a negative slope. If you go from left to right and it goes uphill, it's positive. Left to right, downhill, it's negative. Example number 1, find the slope of the line shown. So as you can see here, we are given a graph. These are especially easy if you just remember the most basic definition of slope is rise over run. So this is how I would do it. I always start with my leftmost point, which in this case is the -2, and I again remember that slope is rise over run. Remember that slope is always represented by a letter m, a lowercase m, and again, rise over run is my most basic definition. Rise is how much it's changing up and down. The run is how much it's changing from left to right. When I'm given the graph of a line and I'm asked to find the slope, I always start off with my leftmost point, which in this case is the -2, -2. The first thing I'm going to find is the rise, which again is how much it's either going up or going down. This graph is going uphill, so it's going to be a positive slope. So I'm going to start by finding the rise by counting upward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. Once I go up to 6 units, I am now on the same level as the other point, 6, 4. So again, my rise, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The rise is 6. So now I'm halfway there. I know my slope m is going to be equal to 6 over something, and now I need to find the run. So remember, I've already counted up 6 units, so I'm right here, and I'm going to find the run by counting over to that point. I'm going to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I went to the right 8 units, so that would be positive. If I had gone to the left 8 units, that would have been negative. So my run is 8. So now my slope is 6 over 8. Of course, I need to write this in lowest terms. The biggest number that goes into 6, that also goes into 8, is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my final answer for the slope is m equals 3/4. Again, if I'm given the graph, just count rise over run. Example number 2, find the slope of the line shown. So this is exactly like the last problem, except I'm just given a different graph. Looking at this graph, it is going downhill. So I know my answer for the slope is going to be negative. Remember, a downhill slope means it's negative. Just like last time, as I'm trying to find my rise over run, which you remember is just the most basic definition of slope, I'm going to start with my leftmost point, and I'm going to find the rise first. In this case, I'm going downwards. So I'm counting down 1 unit to get to the same level of the other point. So down 1 means -1 is my rise. Next, I'll find the run. So again, I've already counted down 1 unit, and I'm going to count over to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. Again, I went to the right, so that's positive 5. So my slope is negative 1/5. That is in lowest terms, so this is my final answer. Example number 3, find the slope of the line passing through the points -3, -1, and -2, +1. This time I'm not given the graph. Could I take out a piece of graph paper and plot these 2 points and then count the rise over the run? Of course I can. If you don't have any graph paper handy, we need to figure out a different way to find the slope. This is when the definition of slope as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 comes in handy. So remember, those subscripts don't hold any numerical value. All they are names of the coordinates. To do this problem, let's just pick one of the points to start with. Let's start with the one over here, knowing that I have to use the y values first. So if I start with that 1 on top, I need to subtract the y values. So 1 minus the other y value is -1. So 1 minus -1. Since I started with the 1 in this point, I need to start with the -2 on the bottom with the x values. So I'd have -2 minus the other x coordinate, -3. To finish this, I would add the opposite. So 1 plus +1 is 2, and -2 plus +3 would be +1. So my slope in this case would be 2/1 or just 2. It didn't matter that I started with this point first, where I started with the 1 in the numerator and the -2 in the denominator. And I'll show you why. If I started the other way around and I'd used this -1 first and then used the -3 first in the denominator, I would have still gotten the same answer. So watch this. If I'm going to start with the -1, and I'm going to subtract the other 1. So again, I'm taking this -1 minus this +1. Since I started with the -1 in the top, I'm going to start with the -3 in the bottom. So now simplifying this, -1 minus 1 is -2, and -3 plus +2 is -1. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so -2 divided by -1 is +2. Do you see how I got the same answer no matter what? So here again, it doesn't matter which point you start with, as long as whatever y value you start with that same x value in the denominator, and you'll get the same answer no matter which point you start with. Now the question always comes up, do you need to show both ways, just like I did here? I was just showing you that it didn't matter which point you started with, that you'll get the same answer no matter what. So no, you only need to show me one way to get the answer, not both. Let's look at another example, number 4. Find the slope of the line passing through the points -6, 3, and 5, -2. So here again, I could get out a piece of graph paper and plot these and just count the rise over the run. But here again, what if you don't have graph paper? So let's just do it the long way. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So remember, whatever y value I start with, I have to start with that same x value in the denominator. This time, let's start with the 3. So if I start with this 3, it'd be 3 minus the other y value is -2. Since I started with this 3, I'm going to start with the -6 in the denominator. So -6 minus 5. Simplifying this, 3 minus -2 is plus +2. So I get 5. And -6 minus 5 is -11. Do you typically keep the negative sign in the denominator? No. So I would just rewrite this as -5 over +11. If you kept it as this, that would be just fine. It's just more correct if you left it like this. Example number 5 wants us to find the slope of the horizontal and vertical lines shown. Notice that we were given the graphs for these two problems. Therefore, we're going to use the most basic definition of slope, rise over run. So starting with the first one, let's pick out 2 points and find the slope. It doesn't matter which 2 points you pick out as long as they are on the line itself. So let's pick out this point right here and this point right here. Again, it does not matter which 2 points you pick out. Just pick out 2, and we're going to count rise over run. So starting here, I don't have to count up any to get from this point to this point. There is no rise. So for my slope, m, the rise is 0, and the run, I'm counting over 2 units. So the run is 2. 0 divided by anything is 0. So the slope of this horizontal line is 0. It doesn't matter which 2 points I picked out. If I picked out 2 other points, there is still a 0 rise And then even if the run was 10, 0 divided by anything is 0. So the slope of a horizontal line is 0. When I'm looking at the vertical graph, I pick out 2 points. Again, it does not matter which 2 points I pick, so let's pick out those 2. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to count my rise over my run. So M equals, let's check out the rise first. Starting with the bottom point, I'm counting up 1, 2, 3 units. So the rise is 3. I am not going over left or right at all to get from this point to this point, so my run is 0. 3 divided by 0 is nothing, as in it is undefined. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot divide by 0. If you typed 3 divided by 0 or any number divided by 0 in your calculator, you would get an error. Literally, you cannot divide by 0. So the slope of a vertical line is undefined, meaning there is no slope, which is not the same thing as 0. It just literally means there is no slope. Therefore, for horizontal lines, the slope is 0. And for vertical lines, slope is undefined. That's literally what you would write for the slope of a vertical line. You would write the slope is undefined, or M is undefined. If you're worried that you're going to get these two mixed up, remember that you can always just count rise over run. So if you're given your horizontal line, realize the rise is 0, so the top number will be 0, and it doesn't matter what the bottom number is because 0 divided by anything is 0. For a vertical line, you can always just pick out the 2 points just like we did and count up. It doesn't matter how much because the run's always going to be 0, and anything divided by 0 is always going to be undefined. As always, write down any questions that you have that we can cover in class before we move on to do your homework over this section, and we'll see you then.